Declassified files reveal 10 unclean government secrets. There are several reasons why governments categorize papers. Officially, it is about upholding public order, maintaining diplomatic ties, or safeguarding what they call national security. In actuality, though, categorization can also refer to the sealing off of choices, plans, and activities that, if revealed in real time, would cause indignation. People have been speculating about what might be concealed beneath shuttered archives and blacked-out pages for decades. Occasionally, those suspicions prove to be unjustified. But at other times, intentions and acts that sound more like political thrillers than official policy memoranda are revealed in declassified archives. Through declassification initiatives, freedom of information requests, and investigative reporting, thousands of previously classified papers have been made public throughout time. Many illuminated some of the darkest periods of the 20th century, especially the Cold War, when governments were forced into morally dubious area by fear of communism and nuclear conflict. These papers show that history is frequently more complex and perhaps more unsettling than the public was first informed, ranging from secret foreign interventions to celebrity surveillance, from rejected false flag schemes to long-forgotten war crimes. Declassified files have exposed 10 unscrupulous government secrets. Katyn Massacre. Russia declassified documents from the Soviet era regarding the Katyn Massacre, one of the worst atrocities in its history, in April 2010. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, executed almost 22,000 Polish officers in various locations, including Katyn Forest, between April and May of 1940. Among the documents were a decree signed by Joseph Stalin authorizing the murders and a letter from Lavrenti Beria, the chief of the NKVD. Following the 2010 Smolensk aviation tragedy, which killed the Polish president on Russian soil, the action was generally interpreted as a gesture toward Poland. Some human rights organizations claim that the release gave the relatives of the victims closure. Sensitive information identifying the NKVD personnel accountable for the murders, however, was still kept secret. During World War II, the Katyn Massacre seriously harmed diplomatic relations between the Polish government in exile and the Soviet Union. Dalai Lama. Declassified documents released in the late 1990s revealed that the CIA ran a covert operation in Tibet between 1957 and 1969. The program's goal was to finance and arm Tibetan opposition to Chinese domination. Tibetan militants received training at Camp Hale in Colorado and in Nepal. According to reports, the program received about $1.7 million in funding annually, in addition to a $180,000 annual subsidy for the Dalai Lama. As part of a larger Cold War campaign to oppose Chinese influence, the records describe the CIA's nearly 10-year participation. When the Nixon administration pursued diplomatic normalization with China in the early 1970s, the aid came to an end. Tibetan militants found it difficult to accomplish the majority of their goals, even with financial and logistical help. Given China's long-standing allegations that the Dalai Lama was an agent of foreign intelligence services, the declassified papers provide more background for Tibet-China ties. Project Stargate. For military and intelligence purposes, the United States government's classified Project Stargate investigated psychic and paranormal events. In response to worries that the Soviet Union was investigating psychotronic weapons, it was introduced in the early 1970s. The program's main objective was to investigate purportedly recurrent psychic phenomena that might be used for espionage. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, two parapsychologists, were involved with the experiment. Initially called SCAN8, which stands for Scan by Coordinate, early remote viewing studies were actually deemed promising by the company. As a result, the program was expanded under military supervision. The technique of remote viewing, which involves perceiving far-off objects without being physically present, was tried by the participants. Psychoenergetics, the theory that people can interact with items or other people across time and space, was also studied. A later CIA commission study found that the program produced no actionable intelligence of sufficient value, despite some internal reports describing isolated achievements. After more than 20 years of testing, Project Stargate was formally shut down in 1995. John Lennon. Following a protracted court struggle, all intelligence data pertaining to John Lennon were made public in 2006. After years of battle by historians seeking access under the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI consented to provide the final documents. The scope of surveillance against Lennon and other activists during the Vietnam War era was described in detail in the files. The records revealed Lennon's connections to anti-war organizations and New Left leaders. They also mentioned his connections to campaigners like Robin Blackburn and Tariq Ali. There was no proof of Lennon's involvement in violent or subversive activities in the records, despite prior allegations that their release could lead to military retaliation against the United States. Because the Nixon administration was concerned that Lennon may encourage young people to vote against President Richard Nixon in the 1972 election, especially in favor of Senator George S. McGovern, the FBI kept a careful eye on him. Operation Northwoods. In the early 1960s, a covert United States military initiative was known as Operation Northwoods. Creating popular support for a war against Cuba was its main goal. The proposal, which included some pretty drastic measures, was drafted by senior military officers. These included planning strikes in United States cities that would be mistakenly attributed to Cuba, hijacking aircraft, and staging violent episodes and damaging refugee boats. The intention was to sway public opinion and provide justification for Fidel Castro's overthrow after the unsuccessful Bay of Pigs invasion. The Joint Chiefs of Staff approved the plan after it was submitted to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in 1962. But civilian authority rejected it, and it was never put into action. The JFK Assassination Records Review Board worked to declassify the materials in the late 1990s, after they had been classified for decades. Operation Mongoose was a related program that President Kennedy started in November 1961 with the goal of using clandestine methods to destabilize Cuba. Mongoose was implemented in a variety of ways, in contrast to Northwoods. Pegasus. Later on, it actually came to light that Director Christopher Wray of the FBI had thought about using the really contentious Pegasus malware for criminal investigations. Pegasus is a zero-click tool created by the Israeli company NSO Group, and it can retrieve a lot of data from a target's mobile phone without the user even having to click on a link or do anything at all. At first, the FBI claimed they had acquired a license just for research and development. Nonetheless, the program was thoroughly tested between late 2020 and early 2021, according to internal documents and court filings. Global worries about governments abusing Pegasus to monitor journalists, activists, and political rivals gave rise to the debate. According to documents, the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division actually suggested its possible use under certain circumstances in March 2021. In the end, though, the instrument was not operationalized by the Bureau. However, the disclosed documents showed just how close the NSA was to implementing one of the most contentious monitoring technologies in the world. There are still worries that similar instruments might be developed in the future for similar research objectives. Operation Gladio. So, following World War II, a stay-behind network known as Operation Gladio was established throughout Western Europe with support from the CIA. Its main goal, when it was first conceived in the 1950s, was to organize resistance in case the Soviet Union invaded Western Europe. When Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti made the operation's existence public in 1990, it caused a great deal of controversy. Declassified documents and parliamentary probes have since yielded more information. Belgium, France, Greece, West Germany, and the Netherlands were among the NATO nations where the network was active. By 1959, it had even expanded to neutral nations like Sweden and Switzerland, despite its initial concentration on allied nations. Weapons caches that had been concealed for decades as part of the stay-behind system were discovered during investigations in Italy in the 1990s. Following claims of connections between network members and far-right extremist activity in Italy in the 1970s, Operation Gladio came under increased examination. Declassified documents verified the presence of a coordinated covert network working throughout Europe during the Cold War, while the exact extent of the operations is still up for question. Indonesian Mass Killing of 1965–66. One of the worst times in Indonesian history occurred between 1965 and 1966. Hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million, individuals perished in an anti-communist persecution spearheaded by the government. Although the executions were carried out by Indonesian authorities and paramilitary groups, various foreign governments, including the United States, were aware of and supported some portions of the campaign, according to declassified documents made public in 2017. The files covered events from 1963 to 1966 and came from the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta. They detailed the methodical attempt by the Indonesian Army to exterminate members of the Indonesian Communist Party, or PKI, and others who were thought to be its supporters. According to reports, the U.S. provided lists of communist officials, financial help, and communication equipment. The mass murders continue to rank among the worst violent incidents in Indonesia's contemporary history. The purge was carried out by civic and religious organizations in addition to the army, and some priests openly justified the violence as a holy obligation. The disclosed documents provided more proof of the campaign's global scope. Gulf of Tonkin Incident. The naval skirmishes between U.S. forces and North Vietnam in August 1964 are known as the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. It's commonly believed to have served as the impetus for extensive U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. In the end, the combat claimed the lives of nearly 58,000 Americans, 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers, over 1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers, and around 2 million Vietnamese civilians. At first, North Vietnamese patrol boats attacked the USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy twice, according to U.S. sources. The purported second strike on August 4th, however, most certainly never happened, according to almost 200 National Security Agency documents that were disclosed in the early 2000s. The intelligence was misconstrued and portrayed as evidence of hostile activity. The alleged occurrences were exploited by President Lyndon B. Johnson to win congressional and public support for military response. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was swiftly enacted by Congress, giving the president broad authority to increase U.S. military participation in Vietnam. The historical knowledge of how the war escalated was drastically changed by later revelations. What happened to Hideki Tojo? Japan's prime minister for the majority of World War II was Hideki Tojo. He was found guilty of war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East following Japan's surrender, and he was put to death in 1948. The exact location of his remains was kept a secret for decades. According to reports, authorities were concerned that making the burial place public would make it a center of nationalist devotion. The riddle was solved in 2021 when a Japanese scholar discovered declassified U.S. military documents. The cremated ashes of Tojo and 6 other officials who had been put to death were dispersed over the Pacific Ocean from a U.S. Army aircraft. It was located around 30 miles east of Yokohama, Japan. The decision was made with the intention of preventing the establishment of a physical cemetery that might serve as a source of inspiration for post-war Japanese ultranationalist movements. In spite of this, Tojo and a number of other convicted war criminals are symbolically buried at Tokyo's contentious Yasukuni Shrine, where their legacy still causes political unrest.